Speed dating is a bit of a random process, and unfortunately, although Barbara had ticked 3 men and 3 men had ticked her as a potential date, none had matched, so she didn't end up with a date from the evening at all. For reasons of vanity, she confessed to feeling a little down as a result, but then said it was a bit of a mixed blessing really, as none of the men that night had set her juices flowing. In fact, she'd lain awake in bed worrying that any of these men would actually want to go out with her for a date, as she'd had serious second thoughts about all of them. So, after a moment's depression, a wave of relief suddenly flowed over her, and although an interesting experiment and something she would do again, it would have to be with blokes from London rather than ones from my neck of the rural woods. In contrast, I got a text saying that I had matches and should call the organisers immediately. The lady laughed when I gave my name. "Who's a popular boy then?" she said, with a distinct smirk in her voice. It seemed 6 out of the 14 ladies that night had ticked me as someone they'd like to see again. I blush. But as I'd only ticked 3 of those 6 ladies as people I'd want to see again, those were the only phone numbers I was given. So, I suppose you want to know how I got on, don't you? Disastrously is a word that would neatly sum up the situation. The first lady I met up with had a life that seemed to be in a bit of a terrible mess, actually. Although very attractive for all her 50 years on this planet, she seemed to have an incredible naivety about life, which had led her into various financial problems, along with several complex and ultimately sad romances, in which she seemed to have been preyed upon by some very unscrupulous men. As for date number 2, our meet never actually materialised. Every time we arranged to meet for a drink, one of us had to cancel, and after about 6 attempts to fix the time and place, by mutual agreement, we stopped trying. I think it was God's way of saying we weren't destined for each other. Besides, she was a terrible snob who went a bit iffy when I mentioned that my then home was an ex-council property. As for the third, she was a widow called Eileen. A charming lady we met for dinner, and we have since become good, if platonic, friends. Her experiences of the middle-aged market had included a singles dinner dance event, the sort you see advertised in the quality Sunday papers. With the chaps obliged to wear black tie and the ladies long gowns, this isn't my kind of thing. So I was glad to benefit from her knowledge and be spared the need to actually attend one of these dreadful events in person. Eileen had been persuaded to attend this singles dinner dance event by a close friend who was utterly convinced that this would be an opportunity for them to meet at least 1, if not 2, multi-millionaires. So they booked up and on the night made their way to the venue dressed up in their best glad rags. It was well attended, but with a distinct gender imbalance, as women far outnumbered the men. And it turned out to be the dullest evening of her life. Everyone sat at tables for 12 in man-woman combinations, but with a shortage of men, some women were left sitting on their own for large parts of the evening. After each course, and there were 4, the men were obliged to get up and move round to the next table. Multi-millionaires seemed to be in short supply that night, and the men that ended up on either side of Eileen were dullards in the extreme with nothing much to say for themselves. As for the post-dinner dancing, following a 4-course meal and much alcohol, the few that felt so inclined either waddled or staggered around the dance floor rather uncertainly. Her verdict? It was a rather overpriced non-event. Now, if the idea of this sort of get-together or speed dating doesn't appeal to you, then you might try telephone dating via the full-page ads that appear in virtually every local newspaper these days, as well as in some of the national papers and other periodicals. Here you'll find long lists of people just like you looking for their dream partner. All you have to do is sift through the numerous personal ads, select the one or ones you like the sound of, ring a premium rate number, and then listen to the advertiser's pre-recorded message about themselves. If you like the sound of them, you leave a message with your telephone number. If that person picks up their messages and likes the sound of you, expect a phone call from which things can further develop. Or you can text them. But will you find the perfect partner? Bear in mind that according to a survey, 35% of the people who use newspaper personal ads for dating are already married. So before we start our investigation into newspaper Lonely Hearts ads, I think it's worth quoting an old joke. A lady inserted an advert into the classified saying, "Husband wanted." The next day she received over 100 phone calls. They all said the same thing: "You can have mine." Just remember that there's a lot of truth in humour. Our guide to what's what in this field of endeavour is my friend Hayley, who has a sordid story or two to tell.